Hello, my name is Kiersti Ford, and today we are going to be talking about a change project that is centered around AB 1705. So, this is for educational reform or EDL502. So, this is my reform analysis and organizational change case study on AB 1705. So, today we're going to talk about an introduction to AB 1705. What is it? Why does it exist in legislation, and how does it relate to AB 705 as well? We'll go through some research questions that are specific to the case study, which I'll explain in a little bit. We'll do some literature review. The literature review is brief because this is just a presentation for a class. We're not doing a full research project here. If we did a full research project, we would be much more extensive here. Some analysis and implementation, the change idea that we have, and then bringing everything back together in a conclusion. So what is AB 1705? This is a Senate bill that went into effect. It was passed in 2022. It was implemented in fall 2023 with a lot of lead-ins, a lot of kind of steps to take in consideration as you implemented this into your college, and full implementation had to be July of this year of 2025. And it builds on AB 705, which went into effect a few years ago. And that one is a little bit different, but like I said, they kind of build on each other. I'll explain a little bit more of that in a second. But basically, this mandates that colleges eliminate remedial math and English. But we're going to focus mostly on math because we are looking at STEM programs, geology specifically. And eliminating this remedial math really put the colleges in a particular corner. When you don't have the remedial math, you have students that come into community colleges that either have not seen math in years because they're coming back to school, or they did not get the high enough math placement in high school, and thus they're just placed into transfer level courses, which are, calculus, trigonometry, pre-calculus, depending on their major. For STEM majors, that's calculus, which is where 1705 becomes a big issue. So 705 was eliminating the remedial math, and then now students all have to be transferred or placed directly into these transfer level courses with appropriate co-requisite courses. And I don't know if you've ever taken a math class, but taking a math class you don't quite feel prepared for, while taking a math class that is the prerequisite for that as a co-requisite. So taking two math classes in one semester can be daunting and can, quite frankly, be unmotivating and discouraging. So we'll talk about some of that stuff today. This specifically significantly impacts STEM majors, which I'm going to focus a little bit on more geology than the rest of the STEM programs, but they all kind of fit into the same category here. And all STEM majors require a strong foundation in math, each of them being a different level of math. All of them generally require some calculus, if not more than 1 or 2 semesters of calculus. So who cares? So, we have a lot of students in our community colleges that are from underrepresented groups, and a lot of them are going to be underprepared for calculus or other transfer level classes. And if they're placed directly into pre-calculus or calculus classes and don't do well or don't flourish because they haven't been properly prepared, they are going to end up probably failing the course, and then that's not going to be good because they're going to get discouraged, and then they're not even going to want to major in whatever it is they picked. We're going to see retention rates be impacted. So because these students are discouraged, they're not going to want to continue. And this could look like they just don't want to continue in a STEM program, or it could look like they want to completely quit college altogether, which I've seen. My aunt is an example of this. She took calculus straight into community college, and she wasn't really the brightest in high school, but she qualified to be placed into calculus. And after a semester of just really struggling, she quit and went to beauty school. And she flourishes now in the hair industry, which is great, but it's, it was discouraging, right? So she quit college altogether because of one class, which is really sad. We really don't want that. So we don't want our retention rates to be impacted. And then obviously failure rate goes kind of hand in hand with them. We expect failure rates to skyrocket in math courses, which are already bad. I think they probably have the lowest pass rate of any of the STEM classes, especially at Fresno City College. And so aiding in they don't have remedial math or they don't have the prepared prerequisites, they're going to end up really struggling. So this reform is rooted in or anchored in equity and access. So the goal here was for students who didn't have access to certain courses now have access to them, especially if they didn't feel like they were prepared in high school. So the goal is that we have students being allowed access to these courses like calculus that otherwise, because of their experience in math, they might have to take several extra courses when that doesn't seem equitable, when they don't need it, right? Because it's not required for their program. If their program doesn't require it, then why do they have to take all these extra classes? Now, we understand that it is to try to prepare them better for the calculus class, but that's where this is coming from, is so that they don't have to take a bunch of extra classes outside of what is transferring. Because if it doesn't transfer, then why are they taking it, right? And it's supposed to help align with guided pathways, the acceleration models. So we have at Fresno City College SAP programs or plans that we put students on, which is student education plans. Couldn't think of the term. Student education plans that line out all of the classes that the student's supposed to take. All of them are supposed to be transfer level and get them towards that end goal of the degree. But when they have to take extra remedial classes to get them to the transfer level courses, it becomes an equity and access issue, right? So that's kind of the goal here, is to try to mitigate some of those things. So let's take a look at the case study. So we're going to focus on Fresno City College. That's where I work. I'm a geology instructor there. And it is going to AB1705 is going to highly impact not just the math, science, and engineering faculty and students, but anything that's related to STEM. That includes the health sciences and rad tech, dentists, all of that. So we'll focus specifically more on geology and some of the other STEM pathways that are closer, but to give you some context, Fresno City College is a huge, diverse population. Students come from all over the county, some coming even from outside the county, and some are coming straight out of high school. Some are coming back from being moms and doing other careers or what have you for years, sometimes upwards of 20 years, and coming back. And if they are placed into these programs and they want to be just taking the transfer level courses, then they go straight into calculus, even though they haven't looked at math in 20 plus years. So we're going to look at some of those impacts. A lot of our students are somehow related to a STEM track, whether they're specifically STEM or they are part of a STEM pathway where they still require high-level math. And like I said, we're going to focus on geology and some of the other STEM pathways where the loss of the remedial math has really put us at an impasse. So some research questions that come into play here is, the big one is, how has AB1705 impacted STEM student pathways, particularly in geology, at Fresno City College, and what supports are necessary to ensure both equity and academic success? So that's the big overarching question. Like, we have this bill. What are we going to do about it? We have to implement it. How do we fix it? And yes, that is a photo of me leading a geology field trip. That's Hollister, where there are some offset faults on along the Calaveras. Anyway, so some sub-questions that we want to consider are, what are the consequences of eliminating remedial math for STEM students? Are co-requisite models sufficient for students in math-intensive fields? And what structural supports would better align with AB1705 while maintaining STEM readiness? And so I think that's one of the biggest things, is whether students are ready for these classes or not, they're taking them. And I think that's the scary thing for some of us is, there's only so much the teachers can do, right? If the students aren't prepared, I mean, we already have our calculus class at Fresno City is technically 1 semester at a CSU, but we put it at 2 semesters to try to make it more accessible, more appropriate for the, the length of the semester and how much you can learn in it, right? Because calculus covers a lot. And if you have to take all of that, especially if you don't take a remedial math class before, like if you don't take trig or pre-calc first, it's a lot easier if you take it in 2 semesters than 1. I took it in 1 semester at Fresno State and failed. And I took calculus in high school. And I still failed it in college. I had to take it over summer and really focus on it. And I did well and went from an F to an A. So that just kind of shows you that, one, teachers matter, and length of the semester and how much time you're dedicated to one specific topic really matters. So trying to make sure that students are ready for these classes and not just thrown into them is really important. So looking at some of the literature, these are going in chronological order, not necessarily in thematic order. So the first one that we're looking at is in 2022, which is before the bill actually passed, but after 705 was passed. And so these are AB1705 and 1705 are state levels. These are not necessarily national yet, although I could see this going national if everybody gets on this bandwagon, but we'll see. So Bracco and Fletcher were talking about looking at the national movement to reform, so kind of how this is being implemented nationally. So far right now, we're looking at California only. Looking at how remedial ed disproportionately affects students of color and low-income students, which is why these bills went into effect. Looking at the percentage of low-income and students of color in all of these remedial math classes was important factors into designing the bills, which, like I said, is why they're rooted in equity and access. They also critiqued concerns over oversimplified placement, so just kind of placing people because it's transfer level, that's what they need for their degree progress, so put them in that class, and not really looking at case-by-case basis. And then they also suggest balancing acceleration with student readiness and support systems. So support systems are going to be huge here. If we don't have the support systems, we're really going to struggle. Then Duffy goes on to explore a more personal experience about implementing 705. Again, 705 just took away remedial math. It didn't talk about specific placement. So they highlighted the tensions between policy, pedagogy, and the realities of underrepresented groups or underprepared students in these classes, and it advocates for a more humane and student-centered implementation process. So making sure we're looking at, like I said, case-by-case basis is really important here. Snell et al. Did some research on assessing whether low-performing high school students placed in statistics or pre-calculus under AB 705 succeeded as predicted. So the prediction there for 705 was that if we remove the remedial math classes, they're still going to succeed in their transfer level classes, and that was just statistics and pre-calc. We weren't even talking about calculus at this point. The actual success rate met or exceeded expectations, validating default placement rules. So seemed to work out okay. Students who started in pre-calc had double or triple completion rate versus those that were put in remedial pass originally. So basically what they're saying there is that the remedial math classes were discouraging people because, you're in remedial math first, you have to take that, and then you can take the classes that you need to transfer. So I think that was kind of where that was coming from. They didn't have to take as much math. So by the time they got to their pre-calc or calculus class, they were, ready to go. Student success was still low overall. It was only 26 to 30%, which in math, I know that looks low, but in math, that's still not that bad, especially without co-requisite support. So that number can go up significantly if we have a co-requisite and you have a lot of good support systems in place for these students taking math that is transfer level. So core requisite offerings are definitely really important for STEM majors, and then non-STEM majors, they are probably crucial, but because the STEM majors take a higher level math, I think it seemed to be more crucial for them. All right, so continuing on with the literature review, Burkander et al. Was looking at faculty support, and a lot of it is lower for 1705 than 705, especially with math instructors, because with math instructors, they're getting students in calculus that, like I said, haven't looked at math, but they qualify because the last math class they took was equivalent to pre-calc or trigonometry. And so they're placed directly into calculus under 1705, where 705 just took away like the super remedial math classes, not trig, not pre-calc. It took away things like intro to algebra, or I think they had a class called What is Math at one point. So it took away classes like that, which none of them were transfer level. And so one of the things that happened when they did that at Fresno City College is we stopped requiring the like algebra class for taking a geology class. And when we did that, we started getting students who, one, haven't seen math in 20 years, or two, never took anything close to algebra in high school. And because they did that, I have students who can't calculate slip rates. So learning about geology, we have to calculate the slip rate along a fault, which is really just, it's a rate equation. So we're looking at kilometers over millions of years or centimeters per year. And being able to calculate distance over time is really confusing, trying to rearrange those if you know what the rate is and you want to know how long it'll take for these two points on Earth to be in the same location because the fault is moving. They can't do that because they don't have the math. And so I have to teach them the math and then teach them the geology. So it complicates our classes because they don't have math coming into it. So that's what 705 kind of how impacted us in our general ed courses. And then 1705 impacts our majors a little bit more. And we'll talk about that in a little bit in a second. Okay, so there's lots of concerns for students being prepared for the rigorous math like calculus. And the recommendations from Burkander et al. Was to strengthen support services and create discipline-specific pathways. So within STEM, making sure that the students are fully supported when they enter these calculus classes. Sarkisian, 2025, this was very recent. Oh, I have that in the wrong order, actually. This was a quantitative study of calculus completion rates post AB1705 in SoCal Community College. So this is very recent information coming out. They didn't see a significant gain in STEM course completion from direct placement alone. So we're not seeing a positive impact there, which is what 1705 was originally intended. Students of color had lower persistence and success rates, which is what we saw when we still had remedial math and when we didn't have direct placement into calculus courses. Supplemental coursework slightly improved persistence, so making them do more stuff, which is not what anybody wants to do. You already have enough to do. And equity is not guaranteed by access alone. The support gaps and systemic inequities still remain the same. So this article did not actually see a good correlation between 1705 and adding inequitable practices in STEM. Service, Raifman, and Sweeney, 2024, was a qualitative study of faculty perspectives on AB705 implementation and how the pandemic impacted those implementations. It proved itself to be a really bad problem. So I don't remember the title of the actual article, but it was a wicked problem impacting assessment, pedagogy, and equity, not actually solving any of those issues. Faculty described increased workloads and challenges aligning with accelerated timelines. So you have to teach more in a shorter amount of time. So for example, if you're teaching calculus and you have all of these students who are directly placed into your class because it's transfer level and it's what they needed for their SEP or their student education program plan, and they don't understand how to do trigonometry, you have to use trigonometry for calculus. So then what ends up happening is you have to teach the trigonometry first, and then you can teach the calculus. So it ends up being more work, and they're learning the calculus faster because you used up time to teach them trig. And otherwise all of your students are going to fail. And then they're looking at you like, why are all your students failing? Well, because you put them in there when they weren't ready. So all those things become issues, and a lot of the literature that focused on faculty really kind of highlighted that, which was good. So some of the common themes that came from the literature review were access alone does not equal equity, which is what AB705 and 1705 really tried to hammer down. But just because placement increases access does not mean that there's equitable outcomes from it. In fact, it can have the opposite effect. The critical role of support systems, so tutoring, co-requisite courses, counseling, all of that is going to be very important to make sure that students are succeeding in these classes. Data validates potential reform potentials, so success for the lowest placement, bands, course, pathway effects. So all of those things kind of go hand in hand. And then systemic structural challenges, the time, the institutional capacity, the structural capacity, structural inequity. One of the things that we noticed in our program is that because the remedial math classes were removed and that students are now placed directly into calculus, we have a lot of teachers that can't teach calculus. And so what are these math teachers going to be teaching? And so they are tutoring right now. Part of their workload is now tutoring because we're not offering as many Algebra 2 classes. We're not offering as many pre-calc classes or trigonometry classes as we were previously because so many are going straight into calculus, and we needed to up the amount of calculus classes we're offering. But we can't as many because we have a lot of teachers that can't teach it or don't feel comfortable teaching it anyway. So that creates a whole other issue that I didn't necessarily see specifically in the literature, but I know that it's happening on our campus anyway. So some analysis and implications. So this is a big shift in the geology major sequence. Some students coming in can go directly into calculus. Well, all of them can go directly into calculus now, but are ready to go straight into calculus, and others need some extra help. And if they aren't getting that extra help, it really impacts how they move through their courses. There's faculty feedback. We've kind of talked about that already. The co-requisite support system is under strain, so it creates more burden on that system as well. The faculty support for 1705 is much lower than 705. Math faculty are actually much more resistant than English faculty, I think because math already in itself is really hard for students to grapple with, and then you're putting all these other barriers in there to try to, make them more successful in the long run. They don't have to take as many classes, but it creates this whole other issue where they don't feel prepared for the class. And then faculty feel many students are not fully supported under 1705. So what implications does this have? Colleges need discipline-specific pathways. We need to increase the embedded tutoring. So we have two different tutoring types at Fresno City, one where the tutoring is embedded. So the tutor comes to that class, takes notes, knows how the teacher is teaching, works with the teacher. They make their own little worksheets and stuff to kind of reinforce the concepts. And then we have tutors that are non-course specific tutors, so they can help you with calculus, but they're not specific for that class, for that teacher. So there's two different types that we have, but the embedded tutoring, I think, works better for math. And then it'll help. We need to strengthen interdepartmental coordination between math and all the other STEM majors, making sure everybody's on the same page. So STEM math success pathway for geology majors. So the problem here is that AB1705 limits remedial options. So that means that many geology and STEM majors are going straight into calculus, but they might not be ready for calculus or even pre-calc. So that's the big problem here. And this is me with some of my students on a field trip. The proposed change would be to implement a structured STEM math support pathway that combines direct placement into pre-calculus or calculus with discipline-aligned co-requisite course, embedded tutoring tied to STEM majors, so specific to those in a STEM pathway, clear advising tracks that align math courses with major-specific needs. And a really good thing to do would be to pilot this in the geology department and then scale that after we do some evaluation of how this works. The cool thing about starting in geology is we don't have a ton of majors. We have anywhere between 15 and 30 in a given year. It really kind of depends. And they're not all on the same yearly track. So any given spring, we're graduating probably 2 to 3. So it's a really small group of students that it's impacting in geology. But if you scale it to all of the STEM majors, it's huge, right? So if you start small and then scale it up, that could be a really good model to see how this implements. And geology has to take, at Fresno City, it's 2 semesters of calculus or 1 semester at State. So applying the organizational change toolkit to this praxis, we're going to look at stakeholder engagement, right? That's going to be STEM faculty, math department specifically, academic support, students, of course. We'll have a communication plan where we would share the equity and data, looking at case examples. We're going to use geology as our example. We'll have a quick win strategy, hopefully, because if you pilot this in just one STEM pathway, especially a small pathway, you might be able to build some significant buy-in for some of the larger pathways. And then, of course, a sustainability plan where we have ongoing data review and faculty feedback loop. So making sure that we're constantly revising our plan and understanding how this change is going to help our students and our faculty, of course. So if we were in class together, this is a hypothetical activity we could do, or this is an activity we could do. We're going to do a hypothetical right now. So the scenario would be you and a team of faculty and staff are designing math support model for STEM placement directly into transfer level math under AB1705. What structures or supports would you build? So some voices to consider would be STEM faculty, especially the math instructors, student services reps, so like our counselors, our tutorial center folks, and then students, of course. So some guided questions as you're working through the activity, some discussion questions among your group would be, what support did your group prioritize and why? So was it counseling? Was it tutorial center? Was it co-requisite courses? What support is most important? Obviously, that's going to depend program to program, student to student even. How does your plan address equity and readiness? And what's missing from current implementation at your institution? So each institution is impacted by this. It might not be your department, but your institution for sure is impacted by 1705 and trying to navigate what that is going to look like. So just some thought-provoking questions. And so some final thoughts. AB 1705 has, yes, expanded access, but readiness and support are completely inconsistent. So we need to make sure that our students are ready to be in these classes and not just stick them in there because then they don't have to take another class and they can fully transfer, but it's not going to be helpful if they fail it. STEM students need targeted pathways and department collaboration. Faculty voice, equity data, and implementation tools are what is going to drive this reform. And so some next steps would be to share model results, build interdisciplinary teams, and share intentional support structures so that we can help these students thrive and be successful in their STEM majors. Here are the references that I used, and thank you for listening.